Okay, so thank you all for coming. So I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Patrícia Amaral from the Indiana University in Bloomington, who's going to talk to us a little bit about semantic change in medieval Spanish and Portuguese. And I'd say, well, without further ado, Patrícia, if you want to go ahead and start.
Sure, thank you. You guys can hear me well, right?
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much for this invitation. And I'm going to be presenting with one of my co-authors, Tian, who is a PhD student in computational linguistics here at Indiana University. So I'm going to share the screen. So you should be able to see my screen now. Yeah, okay. Let me just change to full screen mode. Okay, so as John said, one of our main interests has been semantic change. My background is in semantics and historical linguistics, and so that has been really the motivating factor for this project. And as you may know, the study of semantic change or change in word meaning has really been the least studied in historical linguistics, for sure, much less studied, for example, than sound change. However, with the recent rise of distributional methods, this has changed. A problem that remains is that assessing the accuracy of word embeddings that are used to study semantic change over several centuries is challenging. And I'm listing here two reasons, the ones that have been the focus of our work. First of all, because, of course, native speakers who can provide judgments are not available for former periods of the language. And second, historical corpora are often much smaller than contemporary data sets. And this raises issues of model accuracy that have been pointed out in the literature and in our own work. So one of the works that's listed here, the Hu et al. 2021, focuses precisely on the methodological issues that are raised by small historical corpora when doing this type of work. So in this talk today, we have three main goals. First, to demonstrate the need for targeted model evaluation of models for diachronic semantics, because we cannot use tests that have been developed for modern languages and for modern corpora simply off the shelf. And also we find that we can't use tests for other historical corpora without adaptations. And we would like to present some lessons that we learned from developing intrinsic evaluations to test the quality of models used in our own research on the history of Portuguese and Spanish. So we'll present some of our intrinsic evaluations and the results that we have found. And finally, we'd like to propose some criteria that should be applied for diachronic semantic studies beyond Portuguese and Spanish. So we think that some of the work we have done can be scaled to other languages and to other contexts. Okay, so a little bit of our roadmap. First, I'll talk a little bit about our research on semantic change in the history of Portuguese and Spanish. I'll tell you a little bit about the areas in which we have worked, and our main goal, which has been to compare different methods and what they afford us. So unlike previous work in diachronic semantics using computational methods, we have been interested not so much in predicting semantic change as on comparing different approaches to studying semantic change, more traditional ones, and then work done with word embeddings. And we're really interested in seeing what these different approaches can afford us, and if we can use them in a way that complement each other. Then we will introduce our corpora and the models we have used. And in section 3, we will talk about our intrinsic evaluations, the ones we have developed. We'll mention some previous work in this area. And then we'll explain how we created a test set for historical Spanish based on analogy tests. And then the test set we created for historical Portuguese, for which we created 3 tests: word similarity, outlier detection, and coherence relations. And then finally, as I mentioned, I would like to present some criteria for the assessment of word embeddings that we think are important for this type of work. Okay, so some of the questions we have asked when studying semantic change in Spanish and in Portuguese, we're interested in finding out how do representations of different stages in the semantic change of a word based on word embeddings compare with other methods used in historical linguistics, right? So traditionally, people have basically used concordances and done manual inspection of examples to identify different meanings of a word at different points in time, right? So we're interested in asking, how do these representations we obtain from word embeddings, right? Typically, for example, lists of neighbors or cosine similarity measures, what type of information do they give us, and how can we use it when we compare this to more traditional work done in historical linguistics? A related question is, how can we measure semantic change? So are there ways that are objective and replicable in measuring semantic change? And how do these methods fare with small data sets, which is going really to be one of our main focuses today? And like I said before, our goal has not been to predict change, but rather to test the validity of these methods and trying to figure out how we can interpret their output, what are their limitations, and how do they contribute to work in historical linguistics. So here in blue, I have the summary of two main projects we've had. For Spanish, we looked at the semantic change of the word algo, which meant something. So it was an indefinite pronoun in medieval Spanish. It still is an indefinite pronoun meaning something, but it's also a degree adverb in contemporary Spanish. And so what we have done is study this semantic change using word embeddings, and we've tried to compare this with existing work on the same topic. And then for Portuguese, instead of focusing on one specific word, we've been interested in a class of words. So we were interested in the creation of adversative connectives. So these are words like but or however in English, looking at their change from causal and temporal expressions. And here, our goal has been to provide empirical data that provides evidence for changes that have been hypothesized in the history of Portuguese. So people have said, yeah, these words come traditionally from expressions denoting cause, right? But we don't have a lot of evidence from the data. So this is something we have tried to do in our work. Okay, so I'm giving you here an idea of what we did for the Spanish project, the one on algo. And like I said, our goal has been to really bridge the gap between historical linguistics and NLP. So we were interested in finding out, how does the output of word embedding models compare to existing studies on semantic change? And we used a paper that I wrote some years ago in which I looked at the semantic change of algo, basically looking at the Corpus del Español, which is a fairly large corpus that requires a platform, right? So what you get is concordances that you can go through. And so what we did was look at three different algorithms, SGNS, GLOVE, and SVD, and look at the neighbors, the top neighbors that we obtained for algo in the corpus that is the medieval, that has the medieval data, which we call the Chronicles corpus. And we provide here a rank of words because what we did was average through different runs of the models and provide the ranking in those runs. And we can talk more about that later if you're interested. So our goal here really was to see what type of information we obtain as output of word embedding models, and how do these neighbors inform us about the meaning that this word had in the medieval data. And relatedly, we were interested in knowing, how do these methods enrich our knowledge of medieval data? Because of course, once you get the neighbors, you also get information about other words in the language from that period. And that allows you to see how these words behave in terms of distribution, why they appear here, well, because they have similar properties to the word we're interested in. And actually, we found out, for example, that this word de más was having a very similar development. And this is something that had never been studied in the literature. So with this study, we're really trying to figure out what type of information, syntactic and semantic information, you obtain from word embedding models, and how can you use it when doing historical research. So a little bit of information about the corpora we used. For Spanish, we used a corpus that we called the Chronicles corpus. So this is a corpus from 1200 to 1627, which has about 7 million words. And it's a section of a broader resource, an online resource called Hispanic Seminary of Medieval Studies. And so in Spanish, its title is Textos Cronísticos Españoles. It's just a section, like I said, from this broader resource. And what we did with permission from the authors was basically to download all these texts and then pre-process them for our own use. For contemporary Spanish, we used a much larger corpus called Spanish Billion Words Corpus that we'll refer to by SBW. And this is a resource that combines different Spanish corpora and resources that are freely available on the web. So these are texts from Wikipedia, texts from the United Nations, and also a Spanish tree bank. And altogether, it has 1.5 billion words. One advantage of this latter corpus is that it was originally collected to create Spanish word embeddings. And so it has a lot of other resources, for example, word relation test sets that we used in our work. And then for Portuguese, we used a corpus that we will call here CIPM. So this is Corpus Informatizado Português Medieval. It's a medieval corpus from the 12th to 16th centuries that is relatively small, 2.5 million words. And we obtained this corpus by scraping it with permission of the author. So when you use this corpus online, you have a platform and you can see one text at a time, as you will explain in a second. And so we had to obtain permission from the authors to scrape the entire corpus and use it in our work. And then we compare this corpus with another one called Colonia, Corpus of Historical Portuguese. This is a corpus that was developed by Zampieri and Becker and has texts from the 16th to the 20th centuries and has around 5.1 million words. This corpus was much easier to work with because it's pre-processed and has much less orthographic and morphological variation than the medieval corpus, CIPM. So I'm going now to switch to Zuyu, and he will tell us a little bit more about the challenges of working with CIPM.
Okay, I will talk more about how we pre-process the data in CIPM. Here is a screenshot of the CIPM. You can see that in the document. Here is just one document, and in this document there are many annotations and many metadata. For example, the first line is the metadata of this document, and so there are so many things. And if we want to do if we want to train the language models, probably we need to do some pre-process first. So here's how we did the pre-processing. So first, we just discarded the meta information annotations, and then we also found that in the CIPM, all the accented letters are shown as a letter plus an apostrophe. So which could cause an issue in tokenization. So we normalize all such characters to their actual accented forms. But besides this, no systematic normalization we did in the future. And another thing is that you can, from the previous screenshot, you can see that many tags in CIPM, like punctuation. And the periods are often missing. So this could complicate the whole sentence separation thing. So instead of using sentence or paragraph breaks, each document was treated as a single line. And here's how we train the language model. This is the information for Portuguese model, because in our previous research in Hu et al.'s paper, we found that SGNS actually works better than all the other methods in the analogy test. Patrícia will talk this in the later. And so, I mean, refer to their studies, we directly use the SGNS models. And because we know that there were randomness within the word embedding models, so we created 20 models for each corpus. And the results are shown by averaging all these 20 models. And the model hyperparameters are the following. We set the minimal word frequency as 20, and the window set as 7, and all the vector dimensions are 300.
Okay, so now I'm going to. Oh, sorry, no, this is still Zuyu. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
You'll talk a little bit about the intrinsic evaluation model. Sorry.
And for the word embedding, for assessing word embedding models, there are normally two ways. The first way is through the intrinsic evaluation method. Another way is that we use extrinsic method, which is some different downstream task, and we evaluate the model's performance on this downstream task. But if we do extrinsic evaluation, we need to train the model. So here we only focus on the intrinsic evaluation method. We just directly look into the model itself. And the very first and the most widely used method to test the model's efficiency is the analogy test, which is designed by Miklov. And in this analogy test, which is a Google analogy test, which is also called JAT, it contains 9 syntactic relations and 5 semantic categories for evaluating the word-back models. And besides this, we also see a lot of different methods. The first one is word similarity test. It targets the semantic perspective of some models, and they assess the embeddings by correlating human annotated pairs with model-derived scores. And other evaluation methods targeting semantic perspective include concept categorization, outlier detection, and coherence tests. Oh, but I mean, we can see that all these tests are designed for modern languages, but there are very few intrinsic tests designed for ancient language models. So we think, okay, it is very meaningful to build such resources for the future research. And we also see that, I mean, some other scholars, they design some very meaningful evaluation data sets for detecting the lexical semantic change. They already built data sets for several different ancient languages like English, Spanish, German, and Latin, other things. I mean, they are very useful, but we also see that, I mean, creating such data sets is very time consuming. So we try to find either way to evaluate ancient language models.
So in our first studies, when we were looking at Spanish, initially we used existing word Spanish analogy tests. And these were basically translations from the GAT test that Zuyu just talked about. So this was available through the SBW corpus that I mentioned before, the modern corpus. However, we realized that these need modification in order to be applicable to medieval Spanish. First of all, because the vocabulary in the analogies is not valid for our corpus of medieval Spanish, right? So first of all, we had to remove the tests having to do with capitals of common countries, capitals of the world, city in state, currency, and nationality adjectives. And in addition, some of the morphological tests also didn't work. For example, one of the tests maps an adjective to the corresponding adverb in leaf, right? So this is, for example, quick to quickly, swiftly. So this didn't work for Spanish because this would have been with adverbs in mente in Spanish. And the problem is that for the period of the language that we're analyzing, this suffix had at least different 4 variants, and some of them were written separately, and others were written together with the preceding adjective. So this was a problem because there were just too many variants of this adverb. So we had to simply remove the test. In addition, because Spanish is a morphology-rich language, we decided to focus on inflectional morphology in order to see to what extent the model could identify the relations that we were interested in. So in this next slide, we have a table with the structure of the analogy test that we created. So MTS is the original test, the one that's based on GAT. And then ours is the list of tests that we created in addition to the original one. So you have here a number of relations that are basically morphological relations. So this is what I was saying before about the inflectional morphology. So we have singular to plural, of course, with the different genders. And then because we were mostly interested in studying semantic change, we also included one test that is targeting morphology and semantics. So we looked at antonyms, so like feliz, infeliz, and then possible, impossible. So here we have a semantic and morphological relation. But then we also created a test that's just semantic in nature by looking at antonyms that are all represented in the vocabulary of our older corpus. And so what we did in the end was apply this test that we designed. And here are some of the results. So you can see here, if we just used MTS, which is the translated test from the GAT in English, only 331 out of the 4,000, more than 14,000 tests are valid. And this is simply because most of the vocabulary really doesn't apply to our corpus. But after modification, so this is including the morphological tests and the semantic tests that we created, more than half, so this is the number, is more than half the questions are actually valid. And then we compared the 3 different algorithms that we were working with. You can see here that SGNS performed relatively better than the other ones. And also because of previous work, we concluded that we should use SGNS for the studies we were doing. Okay, so I'll pass again to the floor to you.
Okay, for historical Portuguese, we face more challenges. The first thing is that we can see that the historical Portuguese data is not as large as Spanish data, especially for the medieval Portuguese. The corpus is around like 2.5 million words. So it is small data size, and it has some restriction in genre. And another thing we can see that for the CIPM, you can see it's a searchable data set. It's designed for scholars who do classical studies, not for NLP communities actually. And so the corpora are fragmented, and it is not usable for our purpose actually. And another thing, it is difficult for us to create test resource, evaluation resource, because I mean, for historical data, I mean, we normally do not have a very large pool of resource. So if we want to refer to some like historical grammars or books or dictionaries, it's very hard for us to do such thing. And inspired by our previous works in historical Spanish, we first do the analogy test, which is the most widely used test. And our data set includes 2 grammatical relations for nouns and 4 for verbs. And we ask 2 experts in historical Portuguese to come up with word pairs with analogy relations. And then we combine every 2 word pairs within each relation type. And then we can construct this data set. But if we look into the results of the analogy test, we can see that there is a huge gap between CIPM and Colonial. And the performance of the models in CIPM, it is pretty bad because for some type of the analogy relations, the accuracy is even lower than 1%. For example, like for a third person singular to third person plural. For the word part, I mean, it is less than 1%. So we can say that the result is not very good. But does this mean that the language model trained on CIPM learned nothing or captured nothing about language itself? Well, it depends. So we designed some other tests to test the ability of these language models. The first test we designed is a word similarity test. And this is inspired by Judgements et al. In 2014. And we designed a word similarity test based on the CIPM corpus. The test comprises 100 noun pairs split between high and low frequencies. So half high frequency, half low frequency. And then we separate the semantic relation into 3 categories. The first category is the synonymous, and then it is the second one is related but not synonymous, such as head versus eyes. And the third category is not related, like death or address. So we roughly split our 100 word pairs into these 3 categories. And then we ask 2 experts in historical Portuguese to do the annotation, and we achieved a Cohen corpus of 56% for an annotator agreement. Then we also introduced the outlier detection test. This is inspired by Camacho, Colados, and Navigli 2016. And in their paper, they developed 888 format outlier detection dataset for English. This dataset is to evaluate the vector space models clustering ability. So it means that for this 8, it means that there are 8 different categories of words. And the second 8, it means that there are 8 homogeneous words. And the third 8 is that it includes 8 outlier. So here's how they do this. They will, here's an example in table 6. We can see that there are 8 homogeneous words, and they belong to the animal category. And we also have 8 outliers. So we first put like 1 outlier to this homogeneous words group. And then we try to let the model to detect which word is outlier. So we have 8 outliers, and we can do this test like 8 times. So for the whole data set, we have like 8 multiplied 8 tests, which is 64 tests. And here we design different categories for CIPM and colonial. For CIPM, the concept category includes body part, Christianity, color, food, geography, and others. And for colonial, it includes Christianity, color, food, furniture, and others. And they all obey the 888 formats. And then we also include another test which is called coherence relation. This is inspired by Zhao et al. On 2018, and they create their paper is about like identifying name and drug name identities. So they think that their assumption is that if this is a drug name, then all its neighbors should also be judgements. Well, in our corpora, for example, CIPM, many texts are narrations of either historical or fictional events, and includes names of kings, knights, saints, and places. So there are many proper nouns within our corpora. So we assume that if the target word is a proper noun, then all the neighbors generated by the language models should also be proper nouns. So here's how we did this. We choose the top 25 proper nouns from both CIPM and Colonia. And then we check the proportion of neighbors of a given proper noun that were also a proper nouns. Here is an example of our result. We can see that, for example, the first word, Galazi, and all like we can see that 7 of 10 the word neighbors are proper nouns. So the accuracy of the top 10 neighbors is 70%. And for the other word, Martin, the accuracy is 100% because we can see that all the neighbors are proper nouns. And here is a summary of the tasks we created for the analogy test. We have near 3,000 questions. And for the word similarity, we have 97 pairs because we exclude 3 pairs which show no annotator agreement. And we have 64 for outlier detection, and we have 25 words, the top 25 words for coherence assessments. And here are the results for this test. For the similarity test, we can see that we use two evaluation metrics, the Pearson relevance and Spearman relevance. We can see that, well, Colonia work much better than CIPM, but the gap is not that huge as it is in analogy test. And for the outlier detection, we also use 2 evaluation methods, the accuracy, which is like how many times it correctly predicts the outlier. And we also use another evaluation method, is called OPP, which is outlier position percentage. So which means that if it's we assume that the outlier should be the last one. If we rank the compactness score from high to low, because it should have the lowest compactness score, which is like 1. And we can see that Colonia has very high, which is 98. So for most of the cases in Colonia, I mean, it's positioned as the very final position. But for CIPM, it's 90%. It's also tend to be in the final position, but it's not always the last one, probably. And then for coherence tests, we can see that if we do like the top 5 neighbors, and for Colonia, the accuracy is 92, and for CIPM, it's 83. Well, if we do top 10 neighbors, the Colonia is 88, and the CIPM is 75. So we can see that there's a gap, but it's not that huge.
Okay, so going back to my initial point about the criteria that are important for evaluation of word embeddings. So we believe that the assessment of word embeddings for this type of historical research must meet the following criteria. First of all, appropriateness. So corpus vocabulary must be taken into account, and we showed the large disparity of results. Of course, if we didn't take this into account when we just applied the analogy test from the contemporary data. Also, sustainability. This is still a problem because the tests we did, they did require expert input. And so this remains one of the main problems of creating these specific assessments. Comprehensiveness. So we believe that it's important to include tasks that target different types of relations, syntactic, semantic, and morphological. And finally, complementarity. So it's important to avoid the biases of just using a certain method. So we should try to have a combination of different approaches. So going forward, we think there's a number of desiderata that we should have. First of all, the evaluation needs to be tailored to a certain language and specific corpus. Sorry. The evaluation also needs to be multifaceted. So one type of evaluation alone may give us a very skewed picture of the data. However, we also recognize that a multifaceted evaluation is difficult to interpret. So we need a meta framework to determine how to combine results from different types of evaluation. So if we have very good results, for example, in one type of test, but not in another, how exactly can we interpret this? And what does it tell us in terms of what we should develop for a better assessment? So finally, to conclude, we believe that there is a need for informed evaluation methods that take into account the specificity of historical corpora, because as we know, these corpora tend to be restricted to specific domains and vocabulary. They typically have smaller sizes than contemporary corpora, and they display a lot of spelling and morphological variation. So analogy tests clearly, as they're used for modern data, these are not enough, and we need specific tests that can give us a proper assessment of distributional models in studies of semantic change. And I would like to end with a quote from a recent paper by Erk and Cronies, where they talk about so-called word story embeddings. So they say word embeddings do not just learn about categories of things and events in the world, they also pick up on stories connected to words. And this is definitely the case for historical data, for embeddings from historical corpora, where definitely the word embeddings are very sensitive to the context. And so we obtain really these stories of words. And we believe that these have to be taken into account when we develop evaluation methods for them. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. It's a really interesting talk. Good, so we have plenty of time for questions. So does anybody have anything they would like to start off with?
Yeah, I'd probably start off if there is no one else. Yeah, thank you, Patrícia, John, for a very exciting talk. Really, it's very important for the NLP community to keep in mind that historical language data is very specific, and we need to tailor our evaluation methods for it. So my question will be about variation. When you showed the results, the accuracy results on CIPM, they were pretty low. It looked very much the same as what I got for my Medieval Irish data. And when I did the error analysis, it turned out that one of the main problems was variation, different kinds of variation, like intrinsic linguistic variation, because the language is non-standard, and also different editorial practices, because my corpus included texts, both diplomatic and edited texts, and edited texts were edited in different styles. So does this problem exist in your data, or is the problem entirely due to the size of the corpus?
No, it also exists in our data. So the editions from CIPM, they're mostly diplomatic, and but they're not always done by the same people. And so yes, there's also inconsistency in terms of any editorial annotations. So that was definitely a problem. And for the Spanish data, it's a little bit easier because the people who did the annotations they were always the same. And actually there is a very large, they have a manual of more than 200 pages explaining all the editorial annotations. And so it was a little bit easier to deal with that, and for example, to automatically remove some of those annotations. But for the Portuguese data, that was much harder.
Right.
I don't know if Zuyu wants to add anything about that. Sorry.
Well, just adds to the picture that this problem exists. But do you have any ideas how we can overcome this kind of variation, or do we just have to be aware of it and that's it?
Well, we're in the process of putting together a grant proposal to get more funding to focus precisely on that. So what we did in these initial studies, so for example, for Spanish, initially we did remove a lot of the editorial annotations because, like I said, we knew that they were the same in all the texts. And then we started working a little bit with variations in spelling and trying to do some conversion. So dealing with accents and the cedille, different ways of representing it, stuff like that. But we realized that the more pre-processing we did, the more errors we were introducing, and the results were not necessarily getting better. And so for the project, when we started actually doing the semantic change studies, we actually didn't do a lot of normalization. So we did remove all the editorial annotations, the brackets, and the information about column boundaries, stuff like that. We did some changing having to do with accents, but we didn't normalize everything. So I don't know if that's the solution. We had an approach that was a little bit trial and error. We were trying to see which errors we were introducing, how the models performed with different levels of normalization. But we realized that if we try to normalize everything, so for example, with nasals, because there's so many ways they're represented in the text at this period, and there's also some words already have changed, others haven't, with loss of intervocalic N, for example. It was actually worse to normalize everything, and so we decided not to intervene too much because we were creating more problems.
That's actually a very important thing to to learn. That trying to normalize medieval data may cause more problems than help. Yeah, thank you.
Did you, I mean, I was just curious, did you try to normalize everything, or I mean, what was your...
I was trying to normalize only one aspect, remove the initial mutations and a mutation called lenition that also happened historically in the middle and in the end of the word. So it helped a lot because it lowered the type token ratio, so the level of variation. But the problem with this is it is very easy to remove, but it's very hard to reintroduce. Yeah. Especially when it is not, if you want to go back to the say original diplomatic version of the text and these things are not marked consistently, it's impossible. So again, there is a trade-off that if you do that, the model will not be really applicable to text without that normalization. And yeah, and like other editorial variation, again, it is easy to remove the brackets and that kind of stuff, but more subtle, more intricate normalization, you can't really standardize it in any even semi-automatic way, because there's just so many different variants of it. So my solution was also to go with what I have and try not to make it worse.
Yeah, it's really funny because, for example, initially, and I mentioned that test with the adverbs from adjective to adverb. Initially, we thought, oh, this is really easy to do because I knew from the literature that, you know, the suffix mente, which would be like li in English, right? That I knew it would be mente and miente and mentre. I knew the forms that should exist, and so I thought, okay, we'll just convert them all to mente. And then all of a sudden we realized from looking at the texts that some of them were written together and others were not. And then that also raised another issue that one of the variants actually has the exact same spelling as a word that means while, and that has nothing to do with a suffix. right? The word that we still have in Spanish now is mientras, which is in English would be while. So we were actually converting everything to mente, and that was a disaster because it created errors, right? We were replacing a word by the suffix mente and writing it together with the previous. So it was terrible, and we had to go back exactly to where we had been and restore. I mean, we had to take the original version of the text again and start again from zero with that. So yeah, so we realized that we thought what we were doing by normalizing, but we didn't. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, you got some very promising results with some of the tests. It's good to see. If no one else has any questions yet, can I ask another one?
Go ahead.
So do you think that we also need extrinsic evaluation for historical languages? And if so, what tasks would be relevant? I know we discussed it at the ICHL, but for a wider audience.
So you do want to answer that?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. And I think for the first task I can come up with, I think it's a lexical semantic detection task. And I think they already did it for several languages and several historical languages, and it works pretty well. And they have a benchmark for this. But I think the only issue for this is that it's really need a lot of expert knowledge, and it needs time to do annotations. It's not that easy to create one data set, but I think this is definitely meaningful. And for the other task, I've seen in other papers, the downstream task for ancient language could include like name entity recognition or post tagging or other thing. But for example, in ancient Chinese, we also have like a punctuation because there's no punctuation in the ancient text, and we can add like punctuation. And for example, for CIPM corpus, actually we can see that like there are also some punctuated errors there. Maybe it could be also a task to serve as a downstream task. And well, I mean, anyway, I think this is, I mean, for the downstream task, it's not very easy. I mean, because you need some time to collect data and create a good quality data set for evaluation.
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. Can you please drop the name of the benchmark or the authors to the chat?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Maybe I have a question. I was wondering if you looked into using any modern Spanish or modern Portuguese data, perhaps to sort of initialize the word embeddings with values got from a modern corpus, and to see if that has any improvements in the performance?
We have not done that. We thought about that at some point. The reason why we didn't do it is because the language is, I mean, this may be just, I don't know, the prejudice of the historical linguist, but the language is very different. And I thought we would just, it would not work just because of the difference in the languages. Yeah, maybe we can try it. I just at some point we discussed that, and I just thought it would not work just because of the difference. Did you do that for Irish or?
I don't think we have, Oksana, right? We haven't just tried.
No. I think like for Irish, it might work for early modern and pre-reform modern Irish. So for like later stages of the language, from like late 13th century. But for medieval Irish, I'm pretty sure it won't work because the language is just insanely different from what it is now on many levels.
Yeah, so I think probably for Portuguese it would work, let's say for 16th century onwards. But before that, I don't think so.
Hmm.
I mean, maybe it's worth trying, I mean, as an experiment and see what happens and see what types of results we get. But when we talked about that, I just think it's not going to work.
I think it's worth trying. You can probably try it as well, Oksana.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
But I think it would be interesting in a way to see, yeah, for example, if we did it for let's say for 16th century Portuguese, from 16th to 18th century, for example, which is still not, so modern Portuguese is considered after the 18th century. So 16th to 18th, what happens and what type of results we get? Yeah, maybe that would be worth trying.
Yeah, I think it is doable for Irish too for this time. That's the data I've been working with lately, like from late 16th century to early 20th century. And I think transfer from modern Irish to this period may work, but probably not earlier than that. Although again, it is worth trying.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So are there any other questions?
So I know that I see that Zuyu has shared the information about our the benchmark paper, and we have another paper which is about historical Portuguese, and in that one we give more information about the normalization we do. So we have an appendix in which we do mention the changes we did. But again, I mean, this was after trial and error trying to figure out which changes worked and which changes introduced more errors. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ed. That's very useful. Okay, super.
I'll just mention something in passing. It's probably got very, very little to do with your talk, but it's a sort of link between historical linguistics and semantics. I've got a database of cognate words, a network database of cognate words called Bunidus, that is sort of hobby, mostly in Celtic languages. I gave a Cardamom talk on a while back. And there's quite a lot of them have got glosses in English, which often came from Wiktionary. And I had an idea of doing a sort of semantic historical linguistics linkage in some kind of a way. My sort of idea was somebody needs a Manx word for some concept. And because Manx isn't a minority language, it's a bit difficult to find. But you could go from the English term to English thesaurus to look up Old Irish or Modern Irish words for the same concept, and then follow the etymological links to Manx words, and that might give you ideas for a Manx word. Anyway, I just mentioned that in passing. It's very different.
Thank you. Could you put in the chat, I don't know if you have a link to a paper or, okay.
Yeah, I just sent it.
Okay.
Link to the website.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And yeah, we're very interested in finding sort of creative ways to build on existing resources or, adapt from other languages, because like, so you said, there is a lack of resources. I mean, thesauri and other, that makes it so much more complicated. Every time you'd have to create the test, it really has to be based on experts' work. We can't really rely on an existing resource most of the time.
Okay. Super. Okay, so I think in that case, I'll thank both our speakers again, both Patrícia and Zoyu. So thank you very much. The recording will be available on YouTube soon. And yeah, thank you all and have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.